Okay, so today we're going deep on something pretty fascinating. Uh, how our vision, like how our eyes actually help us learn to read Chinese.
Hmm.
And, for those of us who grew up with like the ABCs, it might seem like, well, duh, letters and sounds just kind of go together.
Right.
But when you really stop and think about it, Chinese characters are so intricate and complex. They're almost like little pictures.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if maybe those visual skills play a much bigger role in learning to read Chinese than they do for, say, English.
Absolutely. And it's actually exactly what a huge study and meta-analysis actually set out to figure out. And they looked at a combined 34 research projects that were published over 2 decades
Wow.
with over 5,000 participants in total. So their mission was to get a clear understanding of how visual abilities connect with learning to read those Chinese characters.
And it really is the visual complexity of Chinese that's
Mhm.
so different from, our alphabet systems where we're so used to decoding, sounds and letters. But Chinese, it seems like it's all about recognizing shapes, the order of the strokes, and then you have those radicals, those visual building blocks that give you meaning or even hints about pronunciation.
Right.
I read that something like 80 to 90% of Chinese characters are actually made up of these components.
That's right. So while English reading relies so much on that letter-sound correspondence, right? You see the letter, the sound.
Right.
Learning Chinese seems like it would demand a lot more from your visual processing ability.
It would seem that way, right?
But the interesting thing is the research hasn't always been clear-cut.
Right. I've heard about those mixed findings. So is this meta-analysis trying to clear that up for us? Give us like a more definitive answer?
That's exactly what they tried to do, and they wanted to answer some big questions like, what's the overall relationship between your visual skills and how well you learn to read Chinese?
Okay.
Do specific visual skills matter more than others?
Hmm.
Does this connection change as kids get older and go through different grades in school? And finally, they looked at if there were any differences across different regions like mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, because there you have differences in simplified versus traditional characters, Mandarin versus Cantonese, and even the way kids are first taught to read.
Wow. A lot to unpack there.
It is a comprehensive look.
So let's get to it. What did they find about that big picture connection between visual skills and learning Chinese?
Well, the meta-analysis found a medium correlation between visual skills as a whole and how well people learn to read Chinese.
Okay.
So it's not like visual abilities are the only thing that matters,
Right.
but they definitely play a part.
Okay. So they're a factor, but not the only key to becoming a great Chinese reader.
Exactly. And it's worth pointing out that the range of that effect could actually be quite broad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the 80% credibility interval suggested the true effect might be anything from a fairly weak connection to a moderately strong one.
Huh. So even if you have really strong visual skills, it doesn't automatically mean you'll be amazing at reading Chinese. Not necessarily. But here's where it gets interesting. When they look specifically at recognizing those individual Chinese characters, those visually dense symbols,
Right.
the average correlation actually bumped up a little.
Okay, so the more visual at the task, like recognizing those characters, the stronger the connection with visual skills.
Exactly. It seems those visual skills are really tied to that initial step of just being able to identify the characters on their own.
Makes sense. Okay, so now let's think about how these visual skills might matter more or less, depending on, how far along someone is in their reading journey, like what grade they're in. What did the meta-analysis say about that?
Right. So for the younger children, they define that as below second grade. They found that things like visual perception, how quickly those kids could process what they were seeing, and pure visual memory showed a low to moderate connection with learning to read Chinese.
Okay, so in those early stages, being able to spot the details, process them quickly, and remember, visual pattern seems to matter quite a bit for getting the ball rolling. That's right.
For example, being able to tell the difference between visually similar characters or recognizing subtle differences in stroke order.
Uh-huh.
That falls under visual perception. And then there's the speed of processing, which is how fast a child can interpret what they see, which is obviously super important when you're scanning lines of text.
Makes sense.
And finally, pure visual memory. That's being able to remember visual patterns without needing to give them a name or label, like remembering a complex shape.
Got it. So it seems like at the beginning, it's really about the eyes getting used to these brand new visual forms.
Yeah.
But what happens as those kids move into second grade and beyond up to like sixth grade? What changes?
Interestingly, the strength of that connection with those basic visual skills didn't really hold up for the older children. It seems like that initial advantage those skills give you kind of fades as their reading gets better.
It's almost like you're saying that early on it's all about decoding those visual symbols, and then later on other skills become more important. That's a great point, and actually the study hinted at this idea by mentioning how young learners often focus on those really obvious visual features first.
Right, like when little kids first learn to read English, they might recognize a word like cat just by the shape of the letters before they can actually sound it out.
Exactly. It's like there's this early phase where you're just trying to grasp those visuals.
Makes sense. So we've got those basic visual skills important at first, but then their impact lessons. But what about this visual verbal association skill? That sounds like it could be the key for linking those visual characters to the spoken language.
You're absolutely right. Visual verbal association is the ability to create and remember the connection between something you see and its spoken name. And this skill showed a strong link with learning to read Chinese consistently, and it was true for both younger and older children.
Okay, so no matter what stage you're at, being able to pair the look of a character with its sound is always important.
Yes, and the meta-analysis found that this skill actually explained a lot of the differences in reading ability, about 34% in lower grades, and even more, about 41% in higher grades.
Wow, that's a big chunk. So how did they actually measure this visual verbal association? What kinds of tasks did the kids have to do?
There were a few common ones. One is called visual paired associates learning,
Hmm.
where children might learn that a specific symbol goes with a particular word,
Hmm.
and then they have to remember those pairings.
Okay.
Another one is untimed letter naming, and while this one uses letters, it really taps into that ability to see a visual form the letter and connect it with its spoken name.
Right.
And they also use the color span test, where kids have to remember a sequence of colored squares,
Yeah.
and they often use those color names silently to help them remember.
So the key is to create that link between a word and what you see.
Right. And it's interesting because when they tested pure visual memory, where kids had to remember abstract designs without any words attached,
Mm.
those tasks often didn't show a strong connection to reading ability.
So it's not just about seeing and remembering a shape, it's about connecting that shape with language.
Exactly. And that makes perfect sense for learning Chinese.
Mm.
You're not just memorizing a drawing. You're learning a symbol with a specific sound and meaning.
Right. You're building a whole visual dictionary in your mind.
Yes, beginning readers are constantly making connections between the words they hear and these new visual forms for those words, and visual verbal association is what makes that happen.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's move on to those regional differences. Mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan.
Hmm.
Did they find any interesting differences there in how visual skills relate to reading?
Well, initially their analysis did show some differences with Hong Kong and Taiwan, seeming to have a stronger connection between visual skills and reading compared to mainland China.
Hmm. That makes you think that maybe the different writing systems, traditional versus simplified, or the different spoken languages, Cantonese versus Mandarin, or even the early teaching methods could be playing a role.
Right, you'd think so. But when they dug deeper, they found something really interesting. Well, it turned out that those regional differences could be explained by the grade levels of the students in the studies.
So it wasn't so much about where they were learning, but how far along they were in their learning.
Exactly. When they compared students in the same grade across different regions, the relationship between visual skills and reading Chinese was actually quite similar.
Interesting. So a child's grade level and how much experience they have reading seems to matter more than all those regional differences.
That's what it looks like. And it suggests that the way our visual skills work with learning to read Chinese might be more similar across those regions than we first thought.
And it's more about how far along the learner is on their reading journey.
Exactly. Now let's circle back to those specific visual skills we talked about, like perception speed memory and that crucial visual verbal association, and see how their relationship with reading changes as kids get older.
Okay, so just to be clear, what did the study show about how these individual skills interact with grade level?
Well, as we talked about, visual spatial perception speed, visual processing, and pure visual memory had a moderate effect in those early grades. But as kids moved up, the strength of that connection lessened.
So it's like those skills help you clear that first hurdle of recognizing and processing those new characters.
Right, but visual verbal association was the outlier. It stayed strong across all the grades they looked at.
So even as kids get better at reading and start focusing more on understanding what they're reading and learning new words, that skill of connecting the character to its sound is still super important.
Absolutely. And the researchers think that as children go beyond just recognizing characters to more complex tasks, like understanding grammar, vocabulary, and getting the meaning of what they read, those basic visual skills become less important for predicting reading success.
Wow. This has been a really fascinating look at a really complex topic.
It is.
So let's do a quick recap. What are the main things we should take away from this meta-analysis?
The main takeaway is that visual skills matter for learning to read Chinese. But which ones are important and how much they matter depends on where you are in the learning process. Things like visual perception, visual processing speed, and pure visual memory seem most helpful in the very beginning when you're first getting to know those characters.
Right.
But that ability to create strong visual verbal associations, to link the look of a character with its sound and meaning, that's crucial throughout the entire learning process. And when we looked at those different regions, it seems like how much reading experience a learner has is way more important than those differences in writing systems, spoken languages, or how they were first taught to read.
For me, the big aha moment is just how consistently important that visual verbal association is. It really shows that linking the look of a character with its sound and meaning is the foundation of learning to read Chinese no matter what level you're at. It really makes you think about how our brains connect visual information with language.
It does, and it raises a really interesting question. Given how important that visual verbal link seems to be, what are the best ways to teach Chinese that really help learners build this skill? And could these findings inform how we teach other languages with complex writing systems, or even just how we teach early literacy in general?
That's a great question. It makes you wonder about what specific teaching techniques could really support that connection.
Definitely something to think about.
And for everyone listening, I'd love for you to think about your own experiences learning new things, especially languages. Do these findings resonate with you?
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating area, and hopefully this deep dive has given you a new way to think about how our visual abilities and learning to read Chinese are connected. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.